Here's a problem. We assign third-year officer cadets during advanced strategic theory. You command a force tasked with reclaiming an Imperial mining world from Tau occupation. Intelligence estimates place enemy forces at approximately 8,000–9,000 fire warriors, 5,000 Kroot auxiliaries, substantial air assets including 120 Barracuda fighters and 40 Tiger Shark bombers. Your logistics officer informs you that water resupply on this desert world presents critical operational constraint. Surface water exists only in landlocked seas with distribution via hydro-processing plants controlled by enemy forces. Your commissar demands immediate offensive action to demonstrate Imperial resolve following humiliating defeat of Space Marine Intervention Force. Meanwhile, resources allocated for this operation are desperately needed elsewhere for defense against Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade at the Cadian Gate. Strategic Command provides 100-day operational window before force reallocation becomes mandatory. What operational approach do you select? Most cadets choose Option Alpha, direct armored thrust toward planetary capital Tarokeen, relying on numerical superiority and Codex-prescribed mechanized warfare doctrine. This mirrors Lord High Commander Otto Ivan Gustavus's actual decision on Taros in 998 M41. Result: catastrophic Imperial defeat. 10,000 killed in action, 15,000 wounded, 20,000 captured or missing, 5 entire regiments annihilated. Equipment losses included 350 tanks, 700 chimeras, 200 artillery pieces, and substantial aircraft infantry. Imperial Navy sustained destruction of 2 cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 8 escorts. The Imperium abandoned Taros to permanent Tau control. Today we examine why conventional doctrinal application failed against an adaptive adversary employing asymmetric operational tempo on favorable defensive terrain. This case study illustrates force ratio miscalculation when technological factors are improperly weighted, supply line vulnerability exploitation through mobility differential, operational pause induced by environmental constraints creating resource scarcity, and the cascading failure mode when multiple operational deficiencies compound simultaneously. Every tactical decision made during the Taros Campaign represents a junction point where alternative choices existed with dramatically different outcome probabilities. We map those junctions to extract transferable strategic principles applicable across diverse operational environments. The Taros situation originated as administrative routine transformed into strategic crisis through intelligence failure and political miscalculation. Departamento Munitorum auditors conducting standard production reviews discovered significant discrepancies at Taros, a desert mining world in Ultima Segmentum approximately 30 light-years from major warp routes. The planet possessed substantial untapped mineral wealth. Initial surveys estimated reserves exceeding 500 billion tons of strategic metals, including adamantium precursor ores, rare earth elements for plasma reactor construction, and crystalline compounds essential for cogitator fabrication. This mineral wealth was critical for supplying Forge World Steges the Eight, which manufactured war material for Cadian Gate defenses against the emerging 13th Black Crusade. When Auditor Prime Nimus Dree investigated production discrepancies, he uncovered 2 decades of clandestine Tau governor collaboration that had escaped Imperial oversight. Planetary Governor Ufer Olus had systematically traded mining rights for Tau water purification technology, fusion reactor components, and atmospheric processing equipment. Technologies that transformed Taros from marginally habitable desert world into comfortable environment for planetary elite. Mining output had increased dramatically, but excess production flowed to Tau industrial facilities rather than Imperial forges. The arrangement represented textbook watercast infiltration methodology, identify planetary elite motivations, provide technology addressing local problems, establish economic dependencies, gradually shift political alignment toward greater good philosophy. The Imperium faced competing strategic pressures, creating operational dilemma. Abaddon's forces were massing at the Eye of Terror, requiring maximum resource concentration at the Cadian Gate for defense against existential threat to Imperium's stability. Intelligence projections estimated Chaos forces at 1.2 million Traitor Guard equivalents, plus 9 Traitor Legion companies, and substantial demonic manifestation capability. Every Guard regiment, Navy squadron, and Space Marine company represented critical force allocation decision. Yet permitting Tau annexation of an Imperial world without response would signal weakness, potentially encouraging further Xenos expansion throughout Ultima Segmentum. The High Lords of Terra faced strategic calculus, accept territorial loss maintaining force concentration against primary threat, or demonstrate Imperial resolve through punitive expedition, accepting resource diversion from critical theater. Political factors overrode strategic calculus. High Lords authorized punitive action despite constrained force availability, driven by assessment that failure to respond would encourage additional planetary defections across the Eastern Fringe. This decision reflected political-military tension inherent in Imperium structure. Military commanders optimize for threat priority. Political leadership optimizes for regime stability. Allowing Tau annexation without response risked encouraging other governors considering similar arrangements. The decision to contest Taros represented political signaling rather than military necessity, a distinction that would haunt operational planning throughout the campaign. Initial planning assumed rapid resolution through decapitation strike against collaborationist leadership. Codex Astartes doctrine prescribed Space Marine intervention for precise surgical operations against compromised planetary governments. The tactical logic appeared sound: infiltrate strike force, eliminate traitor governor and corrupt elite, demonstrate Imperial military superiority deterring future Tau overtures, extract forces before extended ground operations became necessary. Operational timeline projected 72-96 hours from insertion to extraction. Resource commitment appeared minimal: single reinforced Space Marine company plus naval transport. Total personnel commitment under 200, with negligible material expenditure. Risk assessment concluded minimal probability of significant resistance given planetary defense forces' low combat effectiveness and presumed limited Tau presence. Captain Armaros of the Avenging Sons chapter received mission parameters reflecting this assessment: eliminate Governor Aulis and key collaborators, destroy Tau diplomatic facilities, demonstrate overwhelming Imperial military capability to local population, withdraw before Tau reinforcement could. Arrive from nearest Sept world. Force composition reflected decapitation mission profile, reinforced second company strength totaling approximately 120 battle brothers organized in tactical, assault, and devastator squads with Terminator and Dreadnought support. This represented substantial overkill against planetary defense forces, but appropriate force for rapid surgical strike against high-value targets with potential elite protection. Intelligence assessment predicted minimal Tau presence. Perhaps watercast diplomatic mission with single hunter cadre providing security detail, total enemy strength estimated at 150-200 fire warriors with light vehicle support. This assessment derived from standard Imperial intelligence methodology examining known Tau force deployment patterns and diplomatic mission typical security requirements. However, the methodology failed to account for deception operations where TOW had systematically concealed military buildup behind diplomatic cover. Watercast personnel had occupied official diplomatic facilities while Firecast forces deployed covertly to defensive positions throughout Tarrakeen. Intelligence failure stemmed from assuming enemy would operate according to Imperial doctrinal expectations rather than conducting independent analysis of enemy capabilities and intentions. Tau Commander Shas'o Ramir had positioned substantial forces on Taros weeks before Imperial awareness of the situation, demonstrating coordinated political military strategy. While watercast negotiators maintained diplomatic cover, Remir fortified capital city Tarokin with multiple hunter cadres, totaling approximately 800,000 fire warriors, crisis battlesuit teams, numbering 40-50 suits organized in tactical reserves, hammerhead gunship squadrons providing mobile, heavy weapons platforms, broadside battlesuit teams in prepared firing positions, and Kroot auxiliary forces conducting reconnaissance and flank security missions. This force structure exceeded diplomatic security requirements by order of magnitude, indicating long-term commitment to planetary defense rather than temporary diplomatic presence. The defensive preparation demonstrated sophisticated operational planning. Remir had analyzed probable Imperial response options, identified Governor's Palace as likely primary objective for decapitation strike, and prepared multiple defensive layers around key facilities. Fire warrior teams occupied pre-sighted positions with overlapping fields of fire. Crisis suits deployed as mobile reserve capable of rapid reinforcement. Hammerhead gunships positioned to provide direct fire support while maintaining mobility for repositioning. Broadside teams established in elevated positions providing overwatch and long-range anti-armor capability. Pathfinder teams deployed forward observer networks, enabling precision targeting for Seeker missiles and Marker-Light guided fires. When Avenging Sons drop pods descended on Governor's Palace complex, they encountered prepared defensive positions rather than surprised diplomatic security detail. The drop pod assault, normally achieving overwhelming tactical surprise through rapid deployment of combat power, encountered enemy already positioned to receive them. Tau observers had detected strike cruiser Proxima Justice's arrival in system and tracked its orbital positioning, providing warning of imminent assault. This enabled final defensive preparations during the 45-minute period between detection and drop pod launch. The engagement developed into two-day siege, demonstrating mismatch between Space Marine assault doctrine and prepared defensive positions. Avenging Sons established defensive perimeter around Palace Complex, expecting to locate and execute Olus within hours. Initial search operations revealed Governor had evacuated to secure location well before Imperial arrival, another intelligence failure assuming target would remain at official residence. Without primary target available for immediate strike, Armaros faced operational decision: expand search operations attempting to locate evacuated Governor or consolidate perimeter, and call for extraction acknowledging mission failure. Armaros chose perimeter consolidation while conducting search operations, attempting to salvage mission by capturing any high-value targets available. This decision committed forces to static defense rather than mobile operations exploiting Space Marine mobility advantages. Tau forces immediately counterattacked with numerical superiority, employing mobile firepower doctrine that exploited Space Marine positional rigidity. Fire warrior teams conducted suppressing fires, while crisis suits executed flanking maneuvers exploiting their jump capability. Hammerhead gunships provided mobile heavy weapons support that Space Marines lacked in company strength deployment without armor support. Tactical analysis of engagement phases reveals progressive degradation of Space Marine combat effectiveness. Phase 1, 08. Space Marines achieved local fire superiority through superior individual firepower and power armor protection. However, Tau forces maintained standoff engagement ranges, exploiting pulse rifle extended range advantage. Phase 2, Hour 8:16. Tau numerical superiority enabled encirclement attempts forcing Space Marines to defend multiple approaches simultaneously. Crisis suit mobility allowed Tau to concentrate force at weak points while avoiding Space Marine strengths. Phase 3, Hour 16:32. Ammunition consumption rates forced Space Marines into increasingly conservative engagement posture. Bolter ammunition depletion reduced sustained fire capability. Phase 4, Hours 32:48. Critical decision point where continued operations risked complete force loss. Captain Armaros faced decision tree analysis at hour 36 of engagement, commit remaining Terminators and Dreadnought reserves, attempting breakthrough to extraction point. Or request immediate aerial extraction, accepting mission failure, but preserving force. Terminator deployment represented Chapter's strategic reserve for this operation. 5 veteran brothers in tactical Dreadnought armor, with Stormbolter and Power Fist loadouts, plus Chaplain for morale leadership. Committing them risked complete force loss if breakthrough attempt failed against Tau heavy weapons concentrations. Extraction meant admitting Tau military capability exceeded intelligence predictions and required fundamental strategic reassessment. The tactical mathematics supported extraction. Force ratio had degraded from initial 1-7 Space Marine numerical disadvantage to effective 1-10 accounting for casualties. Ammunition status showed tactical squads at 40% bolt ammunition remaining, assault squads at 60%, devastators at 20% heavy weapons ammunition. Medical supplies depleted, treating 18 seriously wounded brothers requiring constant care, reducing effective combat strength. Tau forces demonstrated no degradation in combat effectiveness, suggesting substantial ammunition reserves and reinforcement capability. Probability of successful breakthrough calculated at approximately 30%, with expected additional casualties of 25-30 brothers, including likely Terminator and Dreadnought losses. Armaros chose extraction after losing 3 Terminators and Dreadnought came to massed crisis suit plasma fire during final breakout attempt. The decision preserved 78 surviving battle brothers, but acknowledged complete mission failure. Governor Aulus remained alive and under Tau protection. Tau forces demonstrated combat capability far exceeding intelligence predictions. Most critically, Tau had successfully defended Imperial world against Space Marine assault, an outcome with severe political implications for Imperial strategic credibility. Strategic principle extracted from first intervention failure, intelligence assessment must account for adversary deception capability and independent analysis of enemy intentions rather than assuming enemy operations conform to Imperial doctrinal expectations. Tau watercast diplomatic presence indicated long-term commitment far exceeding temporary trade negotiations. Doctrinal assumption that diplomatic missions require proportional security forces failed when confronting coordinated political military strategy where military buildup occurred covertly under diplomatic cover. Alternative intelligence methodology examining logistics patterns would have revealed Tau infrastructure development inconsistent with temporary diplomatic presence. Evidence included expanded landing facilities, stockpiled supplies far exceeding diplomatic mission requirements, and communications. Infrastructure supporting tactical military coordination. Imperial response to first intervention failure illustrated escalation dynamics and sunk cost fallacy affecting strategic decision-making. Rather than accepting limited territorial loss and concentrating resources on Cadian defense, Segmentum Command authorized full-scale invasion to reclaim Taros. The decision reflected political imperative to demonstrate Imperial response capability after humiliating Space Marine defeat. Lord High Commander Gustavus received orders to assemble 46th 21st Imperial Guard Army, 10 regiments totaling approximately 50,000 combat troops, plus supporting armor, artillery, aviation, and logistics elements, bringing total force commitment to approximately 80,000 personnel. Strategic objective shifted from surgical strike to planetary reconquest through conventional combined arms operations. This force allocation decision created immediate resource commitment problem during period when every Guard regiment was critically needed for Cadian Gate defense. The 10 regiments allocated to Taros represented force commitment equivalent to defending major fortress world or conducting sector-level counter-offensive operations. Opportunity cost analysis, those 10 regiments could have reinforced Cadian defenses, providing strategic reserve for counter-offensive operations against Chaos breakthrough attempts. Or deployed to secondary theaters, preventing Chaos forces from exploiting undermanned Imperial positions. Instead, resources flowed toward reclaiming single minor world of limited strategic value beyond political signaling. Force composition decisions at Army-level planning revealed doctrinal thinking patterns and environmental adaptation considerations. Gustavus selected 5 Tallarn Desert Raiders regiments as operational vanguard, demonstrating recognition of environmental specialization value for desert warfare operations. Tallarn forces brought decades of institutional experience conducting operations in extreme heat and water-scarce environments. Specialized equipment including sand filters for vehicle engines and water reclamation systems, and cultural adaptation to desert operations embedded in regimental traditions. This selection represented sound doctrinal application matching specialized forces to environmental requirements. However, remaining 5 regiments comprised mixed capabilities without environmental specialization. Elysian Drop Troops providing airborne and air assault capability. Cadian mechanized infantry bringing combined arms proficiency. Death Korps of Krieg contributing siege warfare and attritional warfare expertise. Brimlock Dragoons offering line infantry with combined arms experience. And Cyrenian assault engineers providing fortification reduction capability. This force structure prioritized operational versatility and combined arms integration over environmental optimization. Alternative approach concentrating additional desert-specialized units, potentially Attilan Rough Riders for reconnaissance, additional Tallarn regiments, or Vostroyan desert warfare companies would have improved force-to-terrain matching while sacrificing operational flexibility. The force composition reflected fundamental tension in Imperial Guard doctrine between specialization and versatility. Specialized forces perform optimally in their designed environment, but struggle when conditions change. Versatile forces adapt across diverse conditions, but never achieve optimal performance in any specific environment. Taros planning prioritized versatility, based on assessment that operations would require diverse capabilities. Airborne operations for vertical envelopment, mechanized forces for breakthrough operations, siege specialists for fortification reduction, engineers for infrastructure operations. This calculation proved flawed because environmental factors, specifically water scarcity and extreme heat, created operational constraints affecting all unit types, regardless of specialization. Logistical planning phase identified water scarcity as operational constraint requiring mitigation, but failed to recognize it as potential operational center of gravity vulnerable to enemy exploitation. Taros possessed minimal surface water concentrated in 3 small landlocked seas totaling approximately 8,000 square kilometers, barely adequate for 12 million population plus mining operations. Water distribution occurred via a network of hydro-processing plants, converting seawater to potable water through desalination and purification processes, then distributing via pipeline infrastructure and tanker convoys to population centers and mining facilities. Imperial planners recognized this dependency and planned water supply operations accordingly. The planning assumption was that supply convoy operations could sustain advancing forces drawing water from secured hydro plants near landing zones or captured facilities along advance routes. This assessment treated logistics as administrative function supporting combat operations rather than recognizing logistics infrastructure as operational center of gravity whose denial could paralyze military operations. Alternative planning methodology would have identified hydro plant control as primary operational objective, with military operations oriented around securing water infrastructure before conducting offensive operations towards secondary objectives. Instead, water supply was treated as enabling function rather than constraining factor. Daily water consumption calculations illustrated the scale of logistics challenge. 50,000 combat troops required approximately 4 liters per person daily for drinking, increasing to 8-10 liters in extreme heat with heavy exertion. Total human consumption 400,000-500,000 liters daily. Vehicle cooling systems for tanks and artillery required additional 200,000 liters daily. Equipment maintenance, medical operations, and food preparation added 100,000 liters. Total requirement approached 750,000 liters, 750 cubic daily. At 85% capacity utilization, supply operations needed to deliver approximately 880 cubic meters daily to maintain operational tempo. A single heavy tanker truck carried 30 cubic meters, requiring 30 tanker trips daily just for water supply, before accounting for fuel, ammunition, food, and equipment demands. This logistics burden created convoy operations running continuously between supply depots and forward units. Each convoy required security escorts, reducing available combat power, command and control infrastructure for coordination, and maintenance capacity for vehicle repairs. The security requirement was particularly significant. Codex Logistics Doctrine specified minimum 1 infantry platoon security per 5 supply vehicles, meaning water supply alone required approximately 180 infantry committed to convoy security rather than combat operations. This security allocation assumed contested but not highly dangerous supply routes. Against enemy forces actively targeting convoys, security requirements would multiply. Operational timeline planning created additional pressure. Resources needed elsewhere for Cadian defense meant extended Taros deployment was politically unacceptable. Gustavus received implicit mandate for rapid resolution within 60-90-day operational window before force reallocation became mandatory. This timeline assumption influenced all subsequent decisions. Landing site selection prioritizing rapid advance over logistics security. Approach axis determination emphasizing direct routes over protected supply lines, and operational tempo planning maintaining continuous pressure rather than methodical advance with secure logistics. Compressed timeline reduced available options for patient approach, emphasizing logistics security over rapid maneuver. Strategic problem synthesis reveals multiple contradictory requirements, creating operational dilemma. Gustavus needed to reclaim planetary capital demonstrating imperial resolve, achieve objectives within 60-90-day timeline before force reallocation, sustain operations in water-scarce desert environment against enemy forces controlling hydro infrastructure, defeat Tau forces possessing technological advantages in mobility and firepower, and accomplish mission with limited force allocation due to competing strategic demands at Cadian Gate. These requirements created inherent tensions, where optimizing for any single factor degraded performance against others. Rapid timeline conflicted with logistics security requirements. Limited force allocation conflicted with need to secure both combat objectives and logistics infrastructure. Desert environment amplified all these tensions. The fundamental strategic question: was Taros operationally achievable given force allocation, timeline constraints, and environmental factors? This question appears simple but contains critical complexity. With unlimited timeline, any Imperial force eventually succeeds through attrition. Imperium possesses effectively infinite resources at strategic level. With unlimited forces, any objective achieves through concentration. Overwhelming local superiority defeats any defense. But real operations occur under constraints, limited forces, compressed timelines, competing demands. Under these realistic constraints, some objectives become operationally infeasible regardless of tactical competence. Recognizing infeasible objectives before committing resources represents strategic wisdom. Failing to recognize infeasibility leads to resource waste and operational failure. Imperial force structure reflected combined arms doctrine adapted for desert operations, though adaptation proved insufficient given environmental severity. X-Corps comprised 5 Tallarn regiments totaling approximately 25,000 combat troops, with organic armor support including estimated 200 Lehman Russ battle tanks across multiple variants, Tulkanen. Demolisher, Vanquisher configurations, 400 Chimera mechanized transports enabling mounted operations, and 150 Sentinel Walkers providing reconnaissance and fire support. Tallarn regimental organization emphasized mechanization with higher vehicle-to-infantry ratios than standard guard formations, reflecting cultural emphasis on mobility warfare inherited from nomadic traditions on their desert homeworld. Shas'o provided specialized capabilities across diverse operational requirements. Elysian Drop Troops 1 regiment, approximately 4,000 troops, brought airborne insertion capability with Valkyrie air transport, specialized light equipment optimized for air mobile operations, and tactical doctrine emphasizing rapid seizure of key terrain through vertical envelopment. Cascading 114th Mechanized Regiment, approximately 5,000 troop, provided combined arms proficiency with balanced mix of infantry, armor, and artillery integrated through proven Cascadian tactical doctrine emphasizing fire and maneuver. Death Korps of Krieg Regiment, approximately 4,000 troop, contributed attritional warfare expertise and siege specialists willing to accept high casualties, achieving objectives. Brimlock Dragoons, approximately 5,000 troop, offered solid line infantry with combined arms experience. Sarenian Assault Engineers, approximately 3,000 troops, provided fortification reduction capability and infrastructure construction expertise. Supporting arms dramatically expanded total force commitment beyond combat infantry. 4 Warhound-class Scout Titans from Legio Ignatum provided mobile super-heavy fire support with void shields and plasma weaponry capable of engaging any Tau ground unit. 2 companies from Raptor's Space Marine chapter, approximately 200 Battle Brother, contributed elite rapid reaction forces and precision strike capability. Imperial Navy committed 6 capital ships for orbital superiority, 4 escort vessels for patrol operations, 14 transport vessels for logistics, 5 fleet ground liaison teams for fire support coordination, 4 fighter wings, estimately 48 aircraft, 2 bomber wings, approximately 24 aircraft, and 1 tactical reconnaissance wing, approximately 12 aircraft. Adeptus Mechanicus deployed 224 engines teams maintaining vehicles and equipment, plus 12 ordnance teams managing ammunition. Departamento Munitorum provided 2 labor corps and 2 engineer corps for infrastructure construction, plus 78 supply columns managing logistics distribution. Total force commitment approached 80,000 personnel, including combat troops, support elements, and logistics infrastructure. This represented substantial force allocation, equivalent to corps-level operation by Imperial strategic standards. For comparison, typical planetary pacification campaigns employ 15,000 to 25,000 troops. Taros force level indicated expectation of significant resistance requiring conventional military operations rather than police actions against isolated resistance. Tau defensive disposition demonstrated economy of force principles and defensive depth exploitation uncommon in Imperial tactical thinking. Commander Ramir organized approximately 100 hunter cadres into layered defense protecting Tarrakin approaches. Each hunter cadre comprised corps of 10 to 12 fire warriors plus attached specialists, crisis battlesuit teams, typically 3-4 suits per cadre. Stealth suit reconnaissance elements, Pathfinder target designation teams, and drone support assets. This structure provided each cadre operational independence while enabling rapid mutual support through integrated command and control. Force positioning demonstrated sophisticated operational geometry. Forward positions occupied by Kroot auxiliary forces totaling approximately 5,000 warriors organized in kindreds provided early warning screen and initial resistance positions. recruit tactical doctrine emphasized ambush warfare, camouflage, rapid withdrawal, and exploitation of terrain irregularities for concealment, precisely suited for delaying operations against Imperial mechanized advance. Main defense belt positioned 40-60 kilometers from Tarakeen, with fire warrior cadres occupying key terrain controlling approaches. These positions included prepared fighting positions, pre-positioned supply caches, communications infrastructure, and cleared fields of fire optimized for Tau weapons engagement ranges. Mobile reserve positioned near Tarakeen consisted of crisis battlesuit contingent, approximately 40-50 suits organized in reserves, providing rapid reinforcement capability, hammerhead gunship squadrons, approximately 40 Vihisne, supplying mobile heavy weapons platforms and broadside battlesuit. Teams, approximately 15-20 suits, delivering long-range precision anti-armor fires. This reserve structure exploited Tau technological advantages. Hover technology enabling rapid cross-country mobility unhindered by terrain obstacles. Advanced target acquisition systems allowing precision engagement at extended ranges. And combined arms integration, where each element supported. Others through complementary capabilities. Aircast maintained 120 Barracuda air superiority fighters and 40 Tiger Shark fighter bombers operating from permanent airfields near Tarakeen, with protected fuel storage, maintenance facilities, and ammunition stockpiles. This infrastructure provided operational endurance significantly exceeding Imperial forward airfield capabilities. Additionally, Orca dropships, approximately 30 ECF, enabled tactical airlift for rapid force repositioning, and Manta orbital insertion Craft 3 HAT provided heavy lift capability and mobile command platforms. Strategic force ratio analysis reveals deceptively complex picture. Imperial forces possessed 5-1 infantry numerical superiority, $50,000, Imperial versus 10,000 Tau, including auxiliaries, and substantial armor advantage, 600 Imperial armored vehicles versus approximately 150 Tau vehicles. Surface-level analysis suggested overwhelming Imperial advantage requiring only competent execution for victory. However, weapons systems capability comparison reveals effective force parity when qualitative factors receive appropriate weight. Individual weapons comparison, Tau pulse rifle effective range 150-180 meters with consistent armor penetration across entire range band. Imperial lasgun effective range 100-120 meters with degraded penetration beyond 80 meters. Tau standard infantry weapons outranged Imperial equivalents by 40-50%, enabling Tau to achieve fire superiority before Imperial weapons reached effective engagement range. This range differential meant Tau forces could inflict casualties for 30-60 seconds before Imperial forces could return effective fire. Critical advantage in firefight dynamics, where first sustained fire typically determines engagement outcome. Tau armor engaged Imperial vehicles from ranges where return fire was impossible, achieved first-shot kill probabilities exceeding 70%, and withdrew before Imperial forces closed engagement range. Crisis battlesuits represented capability category lacking Imperial equivalent. Standard Imperial infantry carried personal weapons inadequate against vehicle armor. Imperial armor provided heavy weapons capability but lacked mobility to exploit tactical opportunities. Crisis suits combined infantry-level mobility with anti-armor firepower while maintaining durability through shield generators and armor protection. A 3-suit team delivered firepower equivalent to Imperial heavy weapons squad while possessing mobility exceeding mounted infantry and protection surpassing Imperial infantry body armor. No Imperial unit type combined these characteristics. Recalculating force ratios accounting for weapons systems capabilities, mobility differentials, and combined arms integration reveals effective combat power ratio approximately 2-1 Imperial advantage rather than apparent 5-1. This assessment uses engagement effectiveness modeling. Imperial infantry achieve fire superiority against Tau at ranges under 80 meters. Between 80–150 meters engagement effectiveness parity exists. Beyond 150 meters, Tau achieve fire superiority. Average engagement range in desert terrain approaches 200–300 meters given clear sightlines and flat topography. Therefore, typical engagement occurs in Tau advantage range band. Similar analysis for armor engagements shows Tau achieving first-shot advantage in 80% of encounters due to range and mobility advantages. This analysis demonstrates why simple numerical force ratio comparison provides insufficient operational assessment. Imperial planning assumed 5-1 superiority enabled conventional offensive operations overwhelming Tau through mass. Reality revealed effective 2.1 advantage, sufficient for offensive operations but requiring careful tactical execution and secure logistics. The margin for operational error was far smaller than appreciated during planning phase. Imperial landing site selection illustrated risk versus approach dilemma inherent in amphibious operations. Tarrakeen possessed starport facilities providing logistics infrastructure if captured intact, warehouses, handling equipment, hardened runways, fuel storage. Direct assault on Tarrakeen would have shortened supply lines and enabled immediate offensive operations from consolidated landing zone. However, intelligence assessment predicted heavy Tau defensive preparations around capital, making direct assault high-casualty operation. Gustavus selected landing zones 150 kilometers south of Tarrakeen near abandoned mining complexes, trading operational security and reduced initial resistance for extended approach march distance. This decision created extended supply line vulnerability that Tau exploitation would transform into decisive operational factor. The 150-kilometer supply route required convoy operations running continuously to sustain forward elements. Flat desert terrain provided minimal concealment for convoy operations, enabling Tau reconnaissance forces to track every Imperial movement. Extended distance multiplied opportunities for Tau interdiction operations targeting vulnerable logistics vehicles. Alternative landing closer to Tarrakeen would have accepted higher initial casualties but reduced ongoing logistics vulnerability. Classic military trade-off between concentrated risk versus distributed risk over time. Terrain analysis identified observation dominance as structural Tau advantage given defensive posture and technological capabilities. Taros geography consisted of 95% flat desert terrain with shifting sand dunes, bare rock plateaus, and scattered low mountain ranges. The flat topography provided clear lines of sight extending 5–10 kilometers in most locations, dramatically favoring long-range precision firepower over volume fire. Limited terrain masking meant Imperial armor advances occurred under continuous observation by Tau Pathfinder teams equipped with advanced optics and marker-light target designation systems. Every Imperial movement generated targeting data transmitted via secure data links to crisis, suitfire teams, and air support elements. This observation advantage created battlefield transparency asymmetry. Tau forces maintained near-perfect knowledge of Imperial positions through reconnaissance saturation. Stealth suits conducting close observation. Pathfinder teams maintaining distant surveillance, air reconnaissance providing overhead coverage. Imperial forces operated partially blind, dependent on limited reconnaissance assets and scouts providing fragmentary information about enemy dispositions. The information advantage enabled Tau to concentrate forces at decisive points while avoiding Imperial strength. When Imperial forces advanced expecting enemy contact, Tau forces had already withdrawn to alternate positions. When Imperial forces relaxed, assuming no enemy presence, Tau forces struck from concealed positions. Water dependency created operational vulnerability unforeseen in planning assumptions despite identification during preparation phase. Imperial forces consumed 750,000 liters daily for all purposes as calculated previously. Hydro Processing Plant 2330, the facility that would become Operation Comet objective, produced 2.5 million liters daily when operating at capacity, theoretically providing 3x Imperial requirement with margin for system redundancy. However, this calculation assumed secure plant control and uninterrupted convoy operations from plant to forward units. When Tau interdiction operations destroyed tanker convoys, actual delivered water dropped below consumption rate, creating crisis. The crisis manifested first at Tactical Edge, where frontline units operated farthest from water sources. By day 40 of operations, forward Tallarn elements reported troops on half rations 2 liters daily versus required 8-10 liters in desert conditions. This degraded combat effectiveness through dehydration effects, reduced endurance, impaired decision-making, heat exhaustion increasing medical casualties. Vehicle cooling systems operated intermittently, conserving water, leading to engine overheating and increased mechanical breakdowns. By day 50, entire offensive had stalled not from Tau tactical success, but from logistics breakdown induced by supply interdiction. This outcome validated operational analysis principle. When environmental factors create resource scarcity, control of that scarce resource becomes operational center of gravity. Taros water scarcity transformed hydroplants from infrastructure targets into decisive strategic objectives. Whoever controlled water infrastructure could sustain operations. Whoever lacked water control faced operational paralysis regardless of tactical proficiency. Imperial planning failure lay in treating water as logistics problem rather than recognizing it as strategic vulnerability requiring priority operational focus. Advance commencement presented first major decision junction after landing consolidation. Gustavus convened operational planning conference at day 14 with Destale forces come. Captain Aurelius Peptus Sr., Fleet Admiral Cato, and Air Marshal Denvelt, Evius Palifine. Intelligence briefing presented enemy disposition assessment, showing Tau forces concentrated around Tarokeen with suspected positions at intermediate points along approach routes. Force disposition analysis showed Imperial forces consolidated at landing zones with logistics flowing normally from orbit to surface. Gustavus presented 3 operational concepts for commander assessment. Option Alpha, pincer movement with X-Corps, Relan, advancing along 2 separate axes from east and west converging on Tarokeen. She-Corps elements held as operational reserve reinforcing success. This approach matched Codex Astartes' prescribed envelopment doctrine for attacking defended positions, aiming to prevent enemy withdrawal and create encirclement opportunities. Estimated timeline: 45 days to Tarokeen outskirts, assuming moderate resistance. Option Beta: concentrated thrust along single axis, with entire force maintaining mutual support. All 10 regiments advanced together, maximizing combat power density at contact points. This approach sacrificed operational flexibility for maximum force concentration, reducing envelopment opportunities but ensuring overwhelming local superiority at each engagement. Estimated timeline: 60 days to Tarokeen outskirts, with methodical advance. Option Gamma: establish defensive perimeter at landing zones and conduct reconnaissance in force operations, mapping Tau positions thoroughly before committing to offensive. Multiple battalion strength patrols probe enemy positions, identifying force concentrations, defensive preparations, and response patterns. Commence offensive only after intelligence picture becomes comprehensive. Estimated timeline: 75+ days to Tarokeen, accepting timeline constraint violation but potentially reducing casualties through better intelligence. Debate revealed doctrinal preferences and risk assessment differences among commanders. Destale advocated Option Alpha, based on Codex doctrine and assessment that separated forces compelled Tau to divide defensive efforts. Aurelius cautioned that pincer movements against mobile enemy created opportunity for Tau to concentrate against one axis, achieving local superiority. Cato recommended option Gamma, gathering better intelligence before commitment, noting first intervention failure resulted from intelligence inadequacy. Denvelt assessed that aviation could interdict Tau movement between separated Imperial forces, enabling pincer success. Gustavus selected option Alpha based on Codex doctrine, assessed force superiority, and timeline pressure. This decision reflected doctrinal thinking dominating operational art considerations. Standard approach, prescribed by Codex, received implementation despite environmental factors and intelligence limitations, suggesting alternative might prove more suitable. The selection created separated forces, advancing along axes 60 kilometers apart. Beyond mutual support range should Tau concentrate against one axis. Decision analysis examining alternative outcomes. If option Beta selected, Imperial forces maintain concentrated mutual support throughout advance. Tau inability to achieve local superiority anywhere along Imperial frontage compels withdrawal, avoiding decisive engagement. However, concentrated advance allows Tau forces to withdraw intact rather than becoming fixed between converging forces. Campaign likely extends beyond 90-day timeline limit as Tau conduct defensive withdrawal, preserving force. Outcome: timeline failure but reduced Imperial casualties through concentrated strength. If option Gamma selected, reconnaissance operations reveal Tau defensive dispositions and mobile reserve positioning before offensive commitment. Intelligence development enables targeted operations against identified Tau concentrations. However, extended reconnaissance period provides Tau additional preparation time and signals Imperial caution, encouraging Tau aggressive operations. Outcome: superior intelligence picture but timeline violation, triggering force reallocation before operations commence. Actual option Alpha selection created vulnerability to concentration against separated forces. However, Tau strategic assessment prioritized defense over counteroffensive, so concentration risk never materialized. Ramir assessed that attacking separated Imperial columns risked his mobile forces in offensive operations, where Imperial firepower superiority would inflict unacceptable casualties. Instead, Tau conducted mobile defense, gradually delaying Imperial advance while targeting logistics infrastructure. This approach exploited Imperial operational concepts' inherent weakness. Separated forces requiring extended supply lines vulnerable to interdiction. Tallarn's 17th Regiment, leading Eastern Pincer advance, encountered first significant resistance at Tunguska Station after initial 20-kilometer unopposed march. The unopposed advance had created false confidence that Tau forces were withdrawing without contact. In reality, Tau Pathfinder teams had shadowed Imperial advance marking vehicle positions with target designators while remaining undetected. At Tunguska Station, prepared Tau positions revealed themselves through Seeker missile strikes, destroying 11 Lemon Rust tanks before Fire Warrior engagement range. Regimental Commander Colonel Robb faced immediate tactical decision. Option Alpha committed immediate assault closing engagement range to exploit Imperial infantry numerical superiority. Option Beta established defensive positions and called for artillery preparation before deliberate attack. Option Gamma withdrew to reassess enemy strength and request additional forces. Robb chose Option Alpha, immediate assault doctrine prescribed by Imperial Guard tactical manual for encountering prepared defensive positions. The assault advanced across open ground under Tau fire. Fire Warrior teams maintained standoff engagement ranges, withdrawing as Imperial forces approached, then re-establishing positions at new locations, maintaining 150-200 meter separation. This technique, termed elastic defense in Tau tactical doctrine, prevented Imperial forces from closing to effective weapon range while inflicting continuous casualties. After 6 hours fighting, Tallarn forces secured Tunguska Station ruins, but sustained 900 casualties, 30% of regimental strength, for minimal Tau losses, as enemy forces withdrew intact to subsequent positions. Tactical analysis reveals doctrine application failure. Immediate assault against technologically superior enemy employing mobile defense created exposure period where attackers absorbed fires without returning effective suppression. Alternative tactical approach employing artillery saturation before infantry advance might have reduced exposure period, but required precise target location intelligence Imperial reconnaissance failed to develop. Fundamental problem was not tactical execution, but intelligence gap regarding enemy positions and responsive to Imperial movement. This pattern repeated across subsequent engagements. Imperial forces advanced, encountered Tau delaying positions, sustained casualties closing engagement range, secured empty positions after Tau withdrawal, then repeated cycle at next position. Operational tempo degraded as casualties accumulated and medical evacuation requirements reduced available combat power. Average daily advance slowed from initial 8 kilometers to 3 kilometers by day 30. At this rate, reaching Tarrakeen outskirts required 50 additional days, violating operational timeline. Fira Heights engagement became major operational decision point after 6 weeks of incremental advances. The Heights, a 400-meter elevation rocky ridgeline extending 15 kilometers, dominated southern approaches to Tarrakeen, providing observation across entire southern approach zone. Kroot forces occupied elevated positions employing camouflage, prepared fighting positions excavated in rock formations, and ambush tactics exploiting terrain intimately. Desdale assessed that bypassing Heights while leaving Kroot forces in position created unacceptable flank threat to any advance past the feature. Desdale committed 12th Tallarn Armored Regiment to securing Heights through direct assault. 1st Assault 43, advanced regiment along ridgeline approaches expecting armor firepower to suppress Kroot positions. Kroot forces allowed Imperial armor to approach within 200 meters before initiating ambush with anti-armor weapons from concealed positions. 8 Lehman Russ destroyed, 12 damaged before regiment withdrew. 2nd Assault, day 44, preceded by artillery preparation, fired 4,000 rounds into suspected Kroot positions. Infantry assault followed artillery fires, but encountered Kroot forces in alternate positions unaffected by bombardment. Casualties: 400 infantry before withdrawal. 3rd through 5th assaults, days 45-47. Employed variations: night assault attempting surprise, aerial insertion of Elysian elements to Heights, Summit, and armored breakthrough attempt at ridgeline terminus. All failed against Kroot defensive mastery. Total casualties approached 2,000 with negligible terrain gain. Kroot tactical approach combined species biological advantages, hot vision enabling night operations, physical agility permitting climbing operations with environmental familiarity and defensive preparation. Imperial forces attempting to force defended positions in terrain favoring defenders consistently failed. After 5th failed assault, Desdale convened crisis conference. Options presented: Option Alpha, continue frontal assaults accepting attrition until Kroot casualties force withdrawal. Imperial force mass enables sustained losses, while Kroot limited numbers make casualties unsustainable long-term. Option Beta, bypass Fira Heights entirely, accepting flank threat to advance beyond feature. Position blocking force preventing Kroot harassment of main advance while bulk of forces proceed toward Tarrakeen. Option Gamma, shift operational focus to alternate approach axis where terrain provides fewer defensive advantages. Abandon southern approach, temporarily redirecting forces through western approaches. Desdale selected Option Gamma, demonstrating operational flexibility recognizing sunk cost fallacy. The decision acknowledged that persisting with unsuccessful approach simply because resources had been invested represented irrational commitment escalation. Redirecting forces to alternate axis offered greater probability of success despite abandoning ground already paid for in casualties. This decision demonstrated doctrine flexibility, willingness to deviate from original plan when execution proved unsuccessful. However, the flexibility operated at operational level while maintaining doctrinal rigidity at tactical level. Destale adapted which approach to take, but not how to take it, still employing frontal assault tactics rather than developing alternative tactical approaches suited to environmental conditions and enemy capabilities. Battle of Gladamak, days 52-54. Represented test of redirected offensive. Western approach provided flatter terrain with fewer defensible features. Tallarn forces concentrated full armor regiment plus 2 mechanized infantry regiments for breakthrough operation. Tau forces, recognizing limited defensive terrain, conducted fighting withdrawal, maintaining contact while avoiding decisive engagement. After 3 days maneuvering, Imperial forces seized Gladamak mining complex, but Tau forces withdrew intact to subsequent positions. Tactical victory, ground captured, enemy forced from position. Operational stalemate, Tau forces preserved for continued resistance while Imperial logistics situation deteriorated. Supply line vulnerability crisis emerged clearly by day 60. Tau recognition of Imperial logistics dependence enabled systematic targeting of vulnerable supply infrastructure. Pathfinder and stealth suit teams conducted nightly raids against supply convoys traveling between landing zones and forward forces. Small team size 3-6 Circo enabled infiltration through Imperial security perimeter. Marker light designation enabled precision seeker missile strikes from concealed launch positions kilometers from convoy routes. A single successful raid destroying 2-3 tanker trucks reduced daily water delivery by 60,000-90,000 liters, meaningful percentage of total requirements. Imperial counter-interdiction efforts proved insufficient. Increasing convoy security to full platoon escort per convoy 40 troops reduced available infantry for frontline operations. Aerial reconnaissance attempting to locate Tau infiltration teams before convoy departure failed due to stealth suit camouflage technology and desert terrain providing minimal contrast. Counter-battery fire against Seeker missile launch positions arrived at empty locations after Tau teams had withdrawn. Every convoy journey became tactical operation with real probability of losses rather than administrative movement. Simultaneously, Tau special operations targeted Imperial forward airfields with devastating effect. Day 58. Pathfinder team infiltrated perimeter of airfield Secundus during dust storm, providing concealment. Team placed demolition charges on 12 aircraft, including 8 fighters, 3 bombers, 1 reconnaissance aircraft. Coordinated detonation destroyed aircraft before Imperial security responded. Investigation revealed infiltration occurred through drainage channel outside security perimeter. Vulnerability Imperial planners had not identified. The airfield raid demonstrated Tau special operations sophistication and Imperial security inadequacy. Forward airfields lacked hardened aircraft shelters due to rapid construction timeline and resource prioritization for combat operations. Aircraft parked in open revetments, vulnerable to sabotage. Perimeter security consisted of guard patrols and sensor arrays, but desert environment created numerous approach vectors while dust storms disabled electronic surveillance. Tau operators possessed training, equipment, and doctrine specifically designed for penetrating Imperial defensive perimeters. Combined effects of supply interdiction and infrastructure attacks created operational crisis. Forward units reported water shortages requiring rationing. Advance stalled 40 kilometers from Tarokeen despite tactical routes remaining open. Logistics had become the operational constraint rather than enemy combat power. Imperial forces possessed combat power to defeat Tau tactical units in direct engagement, but lacked logistical sustainability to maintain operations. This situation generated Operation Comet proposal as attempted solution to logistics crisis. Staff concept: conduct vertical envelopment operations, seizing hydro processing plant 2330, positioned behind Tau lines 25 kilometers north of current Imperial positions. Plant capture secures water source directly, rather than depending on vulnerable convoy operations from landing zones. Simultaneously, plant seizure forces Tau to divert forces defending installation rather than conducting offensive operations against Imperial logistics. Strategic analysis of Comet proposal reveals operational desperation rather than sound planning. The concept attempted to solve logistics problem through tactical operation deep in enemy-controlled territory. This inverted normal operational logic, where logistics security enables tactical operations. Comet required tactical success and holding to solve logistics problem. But logistics inadequacy was precisely what created need for operation. Circular logic: can't sustain operations without secure water source. Can't secure water source without sustaining forces in deep operations. Alternative concepts existed but received inadequate consideration. Alternative 1, accelerated direct assault on Tarrakeen, accepting higher casualties for rapid decision. Rationale: logistics crisis stemmed from extended supply lines, therefore shortening those lines through rapid advance solves problem. Risk: higher casualties, uncertain success against prepared Tarrakeen defenses. Alternative 2, methodical approach, rebuilding supply infrastructure to sustain renewed advance. Establish fortified convoy waypoints along routes. Expand airfield defenses against sabotage. Dedicate combat forces to counter-infiltration operations. Timeline: 30-40 days before offensive resumes, violating operational timeline constraint. Alternative 3, defensive posture pending reinforcement. Acknowledge current force inadequate for operational success. Request additional regiments from strategic reserve. This admits failure and guarantees timeline violation but preserves force for later operations. Alternative 4, negotiate withdrawal, acknowledging Tau control of Taros. Redirect 10 regiments to Cadian Gate, where strategic value exceeds Taros' importance. Political cost: admitting defeat and encouraging other planetary defections. Gustavus selected Comet operation because alternatives were politically unacceptable/defensive timeable, operationally questionable direct assault/methodical approach, or beyond timeline limits. This illustrates how operational decisions get driven by constraint elimination rather than optimal solution selection. Comet wasn't the best operation, it was the only operation fitting within political, timeline, and resource constraints. Operation Comet planning created multiple decision branches determining execution approach. Decision 1, timing. Immediate execution exploiting surprise before Tau reconnaissance detected preparation versus delayed execution allowing rehearsals and coordination refinement. Selection. Immediate execution prioritizing surprise over coordination. Rationale. Tau observation capabilities meant extended preparation period would compromise surprise. Decision 2. Force allocation. Single regiment enabling single lift operation versus multiple regiments requiring sequential lifts. Selection. Single regiment, 23rd Elysian Drop Troop for surprise. Rationale: multiple lifts sacrificed surprise and increased aircraft exposure to tow air defenses. Decision 3. Objective scope. Seize single plant enabling concentrated defense versus multiple plants dispersing Tau response. Selection. Single plant. Plant 2330. Largest facility. Rationale: limited force required concentration, dispersal invited defeat in detail. Each decision represented binary choice with distinct risk profiles. Aggregated decisions created operation profile, surprise single lift assault on single objective by one regiment. Gambling that speed and surprise compensated for limited force mass. This reflected Codex Astartes' vertical envelopment doctrine adapted to Imperial Guard capabilities, doctrinal template application rather than environmental analysis. Execution phase presented continuous decision requirements as situation developed. Hour 06. Initial landings achieved tactical surprise with Elysians securing Plant 2330 perimeter against minimal PDF resistance. Commander Colonel Balak decision: consolidate defensive positions or expand perimeter to adjacent facilities. Selection: consolidation given limited force. Alternative: expand perimeter would have provided additional terrain but diluted defensive strength. Hour 12. Tau counterattack commenced with Manta dropship insertions delivering crisis suits and fire warrior cadres. Decision: immediate withdrawal via air extraction versus perimeter defense pending relief force. Selection: perimeter defense consistent with mission. Alternative: immediate withdrawal preserves force but abandons objective immediately. Hour 24:48. Siege developed with Tau forces establishing encirclement. Relief force planning initiated by Gustavus. Decision: direct route breakthrough versus flanking maneuver. Selection: direct route minimizing time. Alternative: flanking route might have avoided prepared defenses, but increased time before link-up. Hour 72. Situation critical with Elysian casualties at 40%. Ammunition critical, relief force stalled. Decision: authorize continued relief attempts versus order evacuation. Selection: continued attempts for 24 additional hours. Alternative: immediate evacuation would have preserved more force but abandoned besieged troops. Hour 96. Final decision after relief force achieved no progress. Tau surrender demand received. Colonel Balak options: surrender preserving force for prisoner exchange, breakout attempt abandoning wounded, defense to annihilation. Selection: continued defense. Result: regiment annihilation with senior officers captured. Alternative outcome analysis: if withdrawal occurred hour 24, regiment preservation maintains 2,500 trained troops available for future operations. Operations expense: 1 day investment. Consequence: logistics crisis continues, but trained force retained. If 2 regiments allocated instead of 1, force density at Plant 2330 enables perimeter expansion and stronger defense. Additional regiment provides rotation capability maintaining combat effectiveness. Probability of mission success increases substantially. Consequence: 2 regiments at risk instead of 1. But probability of loss decreases. If bypass approach selected abandoning hydro plant operations, Imperial forces implement rigorous convoy security, accepting reduced operational tempo. Heavy escorts for every convoy, aerial reconnaissance saturation, retaliatory raids against Tau infiltration bases. Consequence: slower advance but sustainable logistics avoids catastrophic loss of full regiment. Each alternative outcome represents plausible decision branch, leading to different operational end states. Actual decisions led to complete regiment loss without achieving operational objective, worst possible outcome. This demonstrates how decision cascades create compounding risk, where each suboptimal choice amplifies negative consequences of subsequent choices. Operation Comet failure triggered command crisis, reflecting organizational dysfunction under operational pressure. After 96 days continuous operations producing minimal territorial gain while sustaining severe casualties, Commissar General Van Horsick relieved Gustavus and de Stijl of command authority. The relief, extraordinary measure given Lord High Commander's elevated rank, resulted from strategic command assessment that operational leadership had lost capability for effective decision-making. Van Horsick implemented immediate operational pause, defensive frontage reduction consolidating forces on defensible terrain, and evacuation planning acknowledging operational objectives had become unattainable. Command relief decision requires analysis. In Imperial command culture, relieving flag officers during active operations represents severe censure, indicating not merely operational setback, but fundamental competence questions. Van Horsick possessed authority as commissar to execute commanders for failure, but chose relief instead, suggesting assessment focused on flawed decisions rather than cowardice or treason. The specific failures cited in relief orders, inadequate logistics security planning, operational tempo exceeding sustainable capability, force employment creating unnecessary casualties through predictable tactical approaches, and failure to adapt operational concept when execution proved unsuccessful. These charges reflect military judgment rather than political assessment. Gustavus had followed doctrine, employed force according to Codex principles, and attempted to achieve assigned objectives. His failures lay in doctrinal rigidity rather than deviation from doctrine. This creates interesting theoretical question. If commander follows prescribed doctrine but operations fail, does failure indicate commander incompetence or doctrine inadequacy? Imperial command culture generally assigns failure to commander. Doctrine represents accumulated wisdom of millennia and therefore cannot be fundamentally flawed. This assumption prevents institutional learning because doctrine never receives critical examination. Alternative organizational culture might examine why doctrine proved inadequate for specific operational environment. Desert warfare against mobile, technologically superior adversary requires different tactical approaches than conventional mechanized warfare. Tau mobility exploitation through hover technology, standoff engagement doctrine, and logistics interdiction represent adaptive responses to Imperial conventional superiority. Doctrine developed against enemies employing similar capabilities to Imperial forces proves insufficient against adversaries with fundamental capability differences. Van Horsich's operational pause shortened defensive frontage from 80-kilometer extent to 40-kilometer consolidated zone, reducing supply line length by half while concentrating forces for more robust defense. This decision acknowledged that further offensive operations exceeded capability given logistics constraints and force attrition. Simultaneously, Raptor's chapter received orders to prepare rearguard operations covering general evacuation. Imperial naval elements began repositioning transports for troop extraction while maintaining combat air patrol against Tau air interdiction. Tau recognition of Imperial withdrawal intentions triggered tactical opportunity for inflicting additional casualties. Ramir, already emotionally affected by Ethereal Envre's assassination, authorized aggressive operations against withdrawing Imperial forces. This represented significant tactical shift. Throughout campaign, Tau had avoided high-risk offensive operations favoring mobile defense and logistics interdiction. Now Tau forces conducted frontal assaults against Imperial-held landing zones attempting to disrupt evacuation and inflict maximum casualties. The tactical shift demonstrates how emotional factors influence military decision-making even in supposedly rational military organizations. Tau Greater Good philosophy emphasizes calculated decision-making, subordinating emotion to rational assessment of best outcomes. Yet ethereal death triggered revenge motivation, overriding tactical calculation. Tau forces conducted repeated frontal assaults against Raptors held perimeter. Precisely the type of engagement Tau doctrine prescribes avoiding because Imperial forces excel in defensive firepower from prepared positions. Ironically, Tau suffered highest campaign casualties during these terminal operations. Over 3 days fighting's 98-100, Tau lost approximately 801,000 fire warriors and 40 crisis suits, exceeding total casualties sustained during previous 97 days. Raptor's defensive operations from fortified positions with heavy weapons support created killing zones where Tau forces sustained severe attrition. This outcome validates Tau original doctrine avoiding direct assault against prepared defensive positions. Abandoning sound doctrine due to emotional response cost Tau more casualties than entire previous campaign. Both sides demonstrated how emotional decision-making degrades tactical effectiveness. Imperial decisions driven by political need to demonstrate resolve rather than military calculation led to operational failure. Tau decisions driven by revenge motivation rather than tactical assessment led to unnecessary casualties. Principle: military operations require suppression of emotional responses in favor of calculated risk assessment. When political pressure, personal emotions, or organizational pride drive decisions rather than operational analysis, effectiveness degrades. Final evacuation occurred over 72 hours, with Raptors establishing defensive perimeter while Imperial Guard regiments withdrew in phases. Total Imperial extraction achieved removal of approximately 35,000 combat personnel plus limited equipment. Heavy weapons, vehicles, and supplies remained abandoned as evacuation prioritized personnel extraction over material recovery. Tau forces maintained pressure throughout evacuation, but Raptor's defense prevented catastrophic losses. Final Imperial casualties for evacuation phase: 800 killed, 1,200 wounded, 400 captured during rearguard operations. 5 complete regiments, Tallarn 17th, 19th and 23rd, Elysian 23rd, Grimlock Dragoon, ceased to exist as combat-effective formations requiring years to rebuild. Tau casualties estimated at 2,500, 3,000 fire warriors killed, 400, 500 wounded, approximately 60 crisis suits destroyed, 20 hammerheads lost, 30 aircraft destroyed, plus substantial crew casualties, an estimated 1,500 killed. Force exchange ratio approximately 8:1 favoring Tau when examining killed in action figures, or approximately 5:1 when including wounded. This ratio indicates fundamental operational approach mismatch rather than mere tactical execution problems. Space engagement provided separate operational theater where Imperial Navy achieved better outcomes than ground operations. Fleet initially established orbital supremacy through superior capital ship tonnage. 6 Imperial capital ships versus Tau fleet of 1 capital ship and multiple escorts. However, Tau fleet employed hit-and-run tactics against supply convoys while avoiding decisive engagement with Imperial battle line. This forced Imperial Navy to disperse forces, protecting convoy routes rather than concentrating for battle fleet engagement. Hunt for Tau, battleship Arho consumed substantial naval resources over a 40-day period. The vessel, Aura's Elite-class carrier, providing Tau Fleet flagship and air group command, conducted commerce raiding operations against Imperial supply shipping, then withdrew into asteroid fields and nebula formations denying Imperial tracking, eventually cornered by Imperial heavy cruiser Righteous Power after extended pursuit. Arho was destroyed in engagement, though Righteous Power sustained severe damage requiring withdrawal for repairs. During Arho hunt, Tau escort squadrons attacked troop convoy Alpha 4 carrying reinforcement personnel and supplies. 5 Castellan-class escorts engaged convoy protection, 2 destroyers, 3 corvettes, achieving tactical surprise through nebular approach. Engagement resulted in destruction of 4 transport vessels carrying 6,000 troops and supplies before Tau escorts withdrew. Imperial convoy protection destroyed 1 Tau escort but failed to prevent transport losses. This engagement demonstrated that naval warfare favored Tau mobile tactics equally to ground warfare. Overall space campaign assessment. Imperial Navy achieved strategic objective of maintaining orbital access for evacuation operations, but failed to prevent Tau commerce raiding, inflicting significant losses on logistics shipping. Tau Navy avoided decisive engagement, preserving fleet while achieving tactical successes against vulnerable targets. Neither side achieved decisive victory, operational stalemate paralleling ground situation. Assassination attempt against Ramir, using Eversor Temple operative, represented strategic desperation measure reflecting Imperial assessment that conventional military operations had failed. The logic: if commander elimination created Tau organizational paralysis, renewed Imperial offensive might achieve breakthrough. Intelligence staff assessed that Tau command structure concentrated authority in single commander, making decapitation strike potentially decisive. This assessment proved partially correct regarding command structure, but failed to account for ethereal political authority superseding military command. Operative infiltration to Tau headquarters succeeded through combination of Eversor Temple superhuman capabilities and Imperial intelligence collection identifying facility location. However, target identification failure resulted in ethereal Enver death instead of Ramir. This outcome demonstrated intelligence inadequacy regarding Tau organizational structure. Planners failed to recognize distinction between military command and political authority. In Tau hierarchy, ethereal caste provides overall direction, while fire caste commander executes military operations. Eliminating political authority potentially creates greater disruption than removing military commander, because latter can be replaced operationally, while former affects strategic direction. Actual result: inverted intended effect. Rather than inducing Tau paralysis, ethereal assassination triggered enhanced Tau aggressive operations driven by revenge motivation. Ramir's emotional response to mentor/political superior's death led to abandoned previously successful defensive strategy for high-risk offensive operations. This created additional Imperial casualties during evacuation phase, while not affecting overall strategic outcome. Imperium still withdrew, leaving Taros under Tau control. This outcome illustrates unpredictability of decapitation strike operations. Removing key leadership can induce organizational paralysis, but might alternatively trigger succession processes, creating renewed organizational effectiveness. Or emotional responses, leading to irrational aggressive operations, increasing threat level. Predicting which outcome occurs requires deep understanding of enemy organizational culture and succession mechanisms. Understanding Imperial intelligence proved to lack. Post-campaign assessment conducted by Departamento Munitorum strategic analysis staff identified 7 primary failure categories requiring documentation for institutional learning. Category 1. Intelligence preparation failed to accurately characterize Tau force composition, capabilities, and operational doctrine. Methodology improvements required: expanded collection against Tau previous engagements, technical intelligence gathering on weapon systems, and organizational intelligence on command structures. Category 2. Logistics planning underestimated environmental constraints and enemy interdiction capabilities. Improvement requirements: environmental analysis treating terrain as active operational factor, convoy security planning as combat operations, and identification of logistics as potential operational center of gravity vulnerable to enemy targeting. Category 3. Operational timeline compression created unsustainable pressure for rapid resolution. Recommendation: resist political pressure for accelerated operations when conditions require deliberate approach. Communicate resource objective timeline triangle to strategic command, and establish realistic assessment protocols for operational feasibility. Category 4. Force composition emphasized versatility over environmental specialization. Recommendation: Analyze environment during planning phase. Select specialized forces matching environmental requirements and concentrate specialized capabilities rather than dispersing across mixed formations. Category 5. Tactical doctrine assumed enemy would fight according to Imperial expectations rather than employing adaptive responses. Recommendation: study enemy previous campaigns, identifying operational patterns, anticipate enemy adaptation to Imperial strengths, and develop tactical approaches suited to specific enemy capabilities. Category 6. Command structure created coordination friction between Guard and Space Marine elements. Recommendation: establish unified command with clear authority delegation. Create liaison structures enabling coordination and determine command arrangements during planning rather than operations. Category 7. Strategic objective clarity degraded as campaign extended beyond initial assumptions. Recommendation: conduct periodic operational assessment determining if objectives remain achievable. Establish criteria for recognizing operational infeasibility, and create decision frameworks for strategic triage, accepting losses when recovery costs exceed value. These recommendations represent comprehensive analysis of Taros failures. However, implementing recommendations requires organizational culture change, permitting doctrine modification based on operational experience, capability Imperial command structure historically resists. Doctrine represents centuries of accumulated wisdom, and changing it based on single campaign outcomes risks abandoning proven principles for temporary adaptation. Tension between doctrinal stability and operational adaptation remains unresolved in Imperial military thought. Comparative analysis with successful Imperial desert campaigns reveals instructional contrasts. During Agrellan operations occurring several years after Taros, Imperial forces achieved initial operational success through logistics-first approach, establishing deep supply infrastructure before commencing major offensive operations. The methodology: secure orbital space decisively, establish protected logistics bases with robust convoy security, build forward supply depots before advancing beyond their range, and conduct methodical operations within logistics sustainment capability. This approach prioritized logistics security over operational tempo, achieving sustainable advance rather than rapid but unsupportable maneuver. Contrast with Taros, Imperial operations prioritized operational tempo, attempting rapid advance before Tau could prepare defenses. This created extended supply lines vulnerable to interdiction and forces operating beyond logistics sustainment range. When logistics collapsed, operational tempo became irrelevant because forces lacked supplies continuing operations. Alternative methodology, treating logistics as constraining factor to manage rather than enabling factor to exploit, would have produced different outcome profile. Slower advance but sustainable operations, reduced casualties from logistics crisis, and maintained combat effectiveness. Second comparative case, Operation Desert Storm 1991C Terra provides historical example of desert warfare against technologically capable opponent. Coalition forces employed logistics-first methodology, establishing massive supply infrastructure in theater before commencing ground operations. 6-month preparation phase built logistics capacity, supporting intended operational tempo. Air campaign preceding ground operations achieved comprehensive air supremacy, enabling unopposed logistics operations. Ground offensive employed combined arms integration with superior technology, exploiting mobility advantages. Campaign achieved objectives within 100 hours ground combat through overwhelming logistics superiority and technological application. Taros comparison. Imperial forces conducted minimal preparation, 2 weeks, failed to achieve air supremacy throughout, encountered enemy with technological advantages rather than holding advantages, and attempted operations without logistics infrastructure supporting intended tempo. Every factor present in Desert Storm's success existed in inverted form at Taros. This suggests operational success requires either overwhelming resource superiority compensating for inadequate preparation or adequate preparation enabling efficient resource employment. Taros possessed neither. Inadequate resources and inadequate preparation combined producing operational failure. Tau victory enabled comprehensive political consolidation over planetary population. Ramir removed collaborationist governor, disarmed planetary defense forces preventing organized resistance, and established direct Tau Earth caste administration over infrastructure operations. Mining operations continued under Tau management, with mineral output redirected to Tau industrial facilities rather than Imperial forges. This represented strategic success for Tau Third Sphere expansion, planet incorporated into Tau Empire, providing resource access and forward base for subsequent operations. Captured Imperial equipment, underwent systematic reverse engineering, providing Tau technical intelligence regarding Imperial military capabilities. Lemon Rust tanks yielded information about armor composition, weapons systems, and fire control technology. Chimera transports provided data on automotive systems and troop carrying capacity. Artillery pieces revealed information about Imperial indirect fire capabilities and ammunition types. This intelligence enabled Tau to develop countermeasures and tactical responses more effective against future Imperial operations. 20,000 captured Imperial personnel faced choice between accepting Tau greater good philosophy through cultural orientation programs or remaining prisoners in detention facilities. Tau approach to prisoners reflected greater good philosophy. Humans who understood benefits of Tau society would voluntarily choose integration rather than requiring coercion. Orientation programs emphasized material benefits break technology. Better living conditions, elimination of Imperium's oppressive social hierarchy, and philosophical benefits, rational society devoted to collective welfare rather than superstitious empire. Reports indicate significant percentage chose integration, becoming Guevesa auxiliary forces. Exact numbers remain classified, but estimates suggest 30–40% conversion rate. This outcome demonstrates Tau soft power effectiveness. Ability to convert enemy personnel through ideological appeal rather than coercion. Imperial Guard troops typically display fierce loyalty to Emperor and Imperium, yet substantial percentage chose Tau service when presented alternative. This suggests either Imperial indoctrination was less effective than presumed, material conditions in Guard are sufficiently poor that alternatives appear attractive, or Tau propaganda techniques prove highly effective. Likely combination of all factors contributed to conversion rates. Strategic consequences extended far beyond immediate Taros situation, affecting resource allocation across entire sector. Imperium had allocated 10 regiments to Taros operations, representing 50,000 combat troops plus support elements. These forces proved unavailable for Cadian Gate defense during 13th Black Crusade critical phases. While 10 regiments represented minor fraction of total Imperial Guard strength, marginal force allocation decisions affect operational outcomes when forces are distributed across galactic scale commitments spanning millions of worlds. Strategic calculus question. Did Taros contest justify resource diversion from existential Cadian threat? 10 regiments at Cadian Gate might have provided strategic reserve for counter-offensive operations when Chaos forces achieved breakthrough, or reinforced key fortress worlds preventing their fall. Instead, those regiments conducted futile campaign on minor world, achieving zero strategic gain. Rational resource allocation would have accepted temporary Taros loss, concentrated all available forces against primary threat, then conducted Taros reclamation after strategic situation stabilized.
However, political imperative to demonstrate Imperial response to Xenos aggression overrode strategic calculus. High Lords assessed that accepting Tau territorial gain without response risked encouraging additional planetary defections across Eastern Fringe. This represented strategic-level application of sunk cost fallacy, resources committed due to political factors rather than military utility. Escalating commitment attempting to justify previous investments and continuing operations past point where rational assessment indicated termination. Tau consolidation of Taros provided forward base for subsequent third sphere expansion operations threatening multiple Imperial systems. Renamed Tyros, planet became logistics hub supporting Tau operations throughout Damocles Gulf region. Strategic position near Imperial border enabled Tau raiding operations against numerous systems, forcing Imperial defensive deployments. This created ongoing resource commitment requirement for Imperial forces defending against Tau incursions. Single operational failure generated continuous strategic costs over extended period. Classic example of operational defeat creating strategic liability. Long-term assessment 15 years post-campaign reveals Taros as strategic inflection point in Tau-Imperial relations. Prior to Taros, Imperium treated Tau as minor Xenos threat, requiring occasional punitive expeditions. Taros demonstrated Tau possessed capability defeating major Imperial operations through superior operational art, despite numerical and resource disadvantages. This forced Imperial strategic reassessment, elevating Tau threat priority, and allocating additional resources to Eastern Fringe containment operations. From Tau perspective, Taros validated Third Sphere expansion strategy, identify vulnerable Imperial worlds, employ watercast infiltration establishing favorable conditions, defend acquisitions using mobile warfare exploiting technological advantages, and consolidate control through cultural integration. This methodology proved repeatable across multiple worlds during expansion phase. Taros' success encouraged aggressive Tau expansion, ultimately triggering larger Imperial response, culminating in Damocles' Crusade years later. Therefore, Taros represents pivotal engagement in larger Tau-Imperial conflict, first major Tau defensive victory against conventional Imperial ground forces. Demonstration of operational art superiority compensating for strategic resource inferiority. Validation of Tau expansion methodology. Encouraging subsequent operations, and strategic inflection forcing Imperial threat reassessment. Campaign operational failure for Imperium created strategic consequences lasting decades. Force ratio analysis methodology requires incorporating technological and qualitative factors beyond simple numerical comparison. Taros demonstrated that apparent 5-1 Imperial numerical superiority translated to effective 2.1 combat power advantage when weapons range, armor mobility, fire control sophistication, and combined arms integration received appropriate analytical weight. Simple headcount comparison provides incomplete force assessment against adversary possessing qualitative advantages in key capability areas. Analytical methodology improvement. Calculate effective engagement ranges for each force element mapping range bands across actual terrain. Identify where each force possesses engagement advantage. Weight force ratios by probable engagement geometry rather than assuming universal application. Consider mobility differentials affecting force concentration capability. Include sustainability factors accounting for logistics requirements and consumption rates. Aggregate analysis produces realistic assessment of combat power ratios rather than misleading numerical comparison. Application to other scenarios. When assessing force requirements for operations against technologically sophisticated adversary, conduct weapons systems comparison identifying qualitative advantages both sides possess. Map these advantages across probable operational terrain, determining where each manifests. Use engagement zone weighted force ratios for operational planning rather than simple numerical ratios. This prevents capability overestimation, leading to inadequate force allocation. Environmental analysis requires treating terrain as active operational factor constraining possibilities equivalently to enemy forces.
Taros desert conditions transformed logistics into operational center of gravity through water scarcity creation. Traditional tactical planning emphasizes terrain's effect on maneuver and observation. Taros demonstrated infrastructure, climate, and resource availability create operational constraints as significant as enemy combat power. Methodology. Conduct environmental analysis examining resource availability. Fuel. Construction materials. Weather effects on equipment function, temperature extremes. Precipitation, wind affecting aircraft. Terrain impact on logistics operations applicability. Distance calculations, choke point identification. And climate effect on personnel endurance, casualties. Cold weather injuries, disease prevalence. Environmental factors constrain operational tempo, force employment options, and sustainable operation duration. Planning that ignores environmental constraints encounters crisis when constraints manifest. Application. Desert operations require water-first planning where hydro-infrastructure control becomes primary operational objective. Mountain operations require addressing altitude effects on personnel and equipment. Jungle operations require addressing disease, limited trafficability, and restricted observation. Arctic operations require cold weather equipment and limited construction capacity in frozen ground. Every environment creates specific constraints requiring operational adaptation rather than template application. Adaptive adversary assessment demands intelligence collection focused on enemy decision-making patterns rather than mere force composition cataloging. Tau demonstrated consistent operational pattern. Avoid Imperial strength areas, exploit dependency vulnerabilities, maintain flexibility through mobile reserves positioned for rapid response. Imperial intelligence focused on counting enemy units and cataloging equipment types while missing operational pattern recognition. More valuable intelligence examines enemies' previous campaigns, identifying recurring tactical and operational choices, predicting likely future behavior. Historical pattern analysis reveals adversary preferences, risk tolerance, decision-making speed, and adaptation capability. Methodology. Review enemies' previous 3 to 5 campaigns. Identify recurring elements in their approach. Note which environmental or situational factors correlate with specific choices. And predict likely behavior in current scenario based on established patterns modified by environmental. Differences. Application. Before operations commence, intelligence staff conducts pattern analysis briefing describing how this particular enemy has operated previously, what they prioritize, what they avoid, and how quickly they adapt. Commanders use this understanding anticipating enemy responses to Imperial actions rather than assuming enemy will behave according to Imperial doctrinal expectations. This enables pre-positioning countermoves against anticipated enemy actions. Logistics security requires treating supply operations as combat missions warranting frontline equivalent resource allocation. Imperial convoy operations employed minimal security escorts treating resupply as administrative rear area activity. Tau recognized convoys as high-value targets achieving disproportionate operational effect through logistics interdiction. When enemy prioritizes logistics targeting, defending logistics with combat power equivalent to frontline operations becomes necessary. Methodology. Identify logistics operations enemy might target. Airfields, supply depots, pipelines. Assess potential operational impact if enemy achieves destruction. Allocate security forces proportional to operational importance. Convoys carrying critical supplies receive escort equivalent to maneuver element protection. Conduct convoy movements as tactical maneuvers employing reconnaissance ahead, security flanks, and prepared response forces for ambush situations. Establish fortified waypoints along supply routes, enabling protected staging and vehicle maintenance. Application. In any operation where enemy possesses capability targeting logistics, security becomes combat operation rather than administrative function. This requires accepting that substantial combat power diverts from frontline operations to logistics protection. However, unsecured logistics creates vulnerability, where small enemy forces achieve disproportionate operational effects. Better to allocate 20% combat power protecting logistics, enabling 80% offensive operations, than allocate 0% protection, resulting in logistics collapse paralyzing entire force. Operational pause exploitation requires recognizing enemy observation capabilities and implementing counter-reconnaissance, preventing enemy from developing accurate intelligence picture. Taro's 2-week Imperial consolidation period after landing provided Tau complete intelligence regarding deployment patterns, force composition, command post locations, and logistics infrastructure. This observation advantage enabled Tau positioning, achieving maximum operational effect. Principle: assume enemy possesses perfect battlefield transparency absent specific measures denying observation. In modern warfare against technologically capable adversary, electronic emissions, vehicle signatures, and personnel movement create detectable patterns. Countermeasures include continuous repositioning, preventing enemy from establishing targeting solutions, deception operations creating false intelligence picture through dummy positions and false radio traffic, aggressive counter-reconnaissance destroying enemy observation assets before they report, and emissions control minimizing electronic signatures. Application: during operational pauses, forces implement security measures equivalent to combat conditions rather than relaxing. Units reposition frequently, decoy positions simulate actual deployments, reconnaissance patrols interdict enemy observation attempts, and electromagnetic discipline prevents signals intelligence collection. This denies enemy the intelligence windfall that extended static deployment provides. Doctrinal flexibility assessment determines when doctrine provides useful framework versus when it constrains necessary adaptation. Codex Astartes and Imperial Guard tactical doctrine prescribe approaches proven effective across diverse scenarios. However, blanket application without terrain and enemy adaptation creates vulnerability when conditions diverge significantly from doctrinal assumptions. Decision framework: apply doctrine as default approach, providing proven methodology. Conduct continuous effectiveness assessment during execution, measuring whether intended effects manifest. When execution consistently fails achieving intended outcomes despite competent implementation, conduct analytical review determining if environmental factors or enemy capabilities invalidate doctrinal assumptions. Willingness to deviate from doctrine when circumstances warrant represents adaptive thinking rather than indiscipline. Raptors demonstrated doctrinal adaptation value through camouflage modification, infiltration emphasis, and precision strike techniques diverging from traditional Space Marine shock assault. Tallarn forces applied desert warfare specialization successfully at tactical level. Failures occurred at operational level, where Gustavus maintained mechanized doctrine rigidity despite environmental mismatch and enemy adaptation. Tactical flexibility without operational flexibility creates situation where engagements succeed but campaigns fail. Application: commanders at all levels require authorization deviating from doctrine when tactical or operational situation indicates adaptation necessary. This requires cultural change permitting initiative rather than demanding rigid doctrinal compliance. However, deviations require sound tactical reasoning. Commanders must articulate why specific situation warrants deviation and what alternative approach better suits circumstances. This prevents arbitrary doctrine abandonment while enabling necessary adaptation. Vertical envelopment operations require force mass sufficient for objective sustainability against determined enemy response. Elysian deployment at Plant 2330 achieved tactical surprise but lacked force density holding against counterattack. Principle:
airborne operations succeed when follow-on forces rapidly reinforce initial lodgment, creating force mass withstanding enemy reaction. If reinforcement timeline extends beyond enemy reaction capability, initial force requires self-sufficiency for extended independent operations, including ammunition stocks, medical capability, and fortification materials. Application. Vertical envelopment planning calculates time from landing until ground link-up forces arrive, enemy force mass available for counterattack within that time frame, defensive capability initial force possesses, and probability of holding until reinforcement. If probability falls below acceptable threshold, operation requires either additional initial force increasing defensive capability, accelerated ground link-up reducing independent operation duration, multiple simultaneous landings creating enemy response dilemma, or mission abandonment selecting. Alternative approach. Taros' alternative would have been deploying 2 regiments simultaneously to multiple objectives, creating situation where Tau must divide forces defending all positions or accept loss of some objectives. Single regiment at single objective enabled Tau concentrating full response capability against that point, achieving overwhelming local superiority. Command structure unity becomes critical during combined arms operations requiring close coordination and synchronized timing. Dual Imperial Guard Space Marine command arrangement created friction during relief operations. While Space Marine operational autonomy reflects their elite status and chapter independence, integrated operations demand unified command enabling synchronized timing and mutual support. Alternative structures. Designate single overall commander with full authority over all forces regardless of organizational affiliation, requires political will imposing unified command despite institutional resistance. Or establish robust liaison structure enabling coordination while preserving command separation, liaison officers with authority committing their forces to support operations, integrated planning staffs developing coordinated plans, and communications infrastructure enabling real-time coordination. Current dual command approach created worst outcome. Neither unity of command nor effective coordination mechanism. Guard forces planned operations assuming Space Marines support that Marines might not provide. Space Marines conducted operations without informing Guard, creating missed coordination opportunities. Resolution requires conscious command structure decision during planning rather than allowing default dual command, creating inevitable friction during execution. Application. Before operations commence, strategic command designates command relationships explicitly. For integrated operations, unified command receives preference. When institutional factors prevent unified command, liaison structure receives formal establishment with clear authorities and communication protocols. Never allow command relationships to remain ambiguous, assuming they will resolve naturally during operations. Timeline compression effect on operational planning demonstrates how political pressure for rapid resolution drives decisions prioritizing speed over security, creating vulnerability. Taros timeline pressure generated. Abbreviated logistics planning, accelerated operational commencement without adequate intelligence, and operational tempo maintenance despite mounting evidence of unsustainability. Principle. Resist political pressure, compressing operational timeline when conditions require deliberate approach. Military leadership must communicate resource-objective timeline triangle to political authority. Achieving objective rapidly requires more resources. Achieving with available resources requires more time. And rapid timeline with limited resources risks objective failure. This requires courage articulating unpleasant realities rather than accepting unrealistic mandates. However, political authority possesses legitimate prerogatives setting priorities, weighing military factors against political considerations. Sometimes, political timeline imperatives outweigh military preference for deliberate operations. In those cases, military leadership must clearly communicate increased risk and resource requirements rather than attempting impossible standards. This enables informed political decision rather than military promising unachievable outcomes, then failing. Application. During planning phase, staffs develop operational timeline based on realistic tempo assessment, accounting for logistics, enemy resistance, and environmental factors. When political authority mandates accelerated timeline, staffs identify additional resources required maintaining acceptable risk level under compressed timeline. Political authority then decides, accept military timeline recommendation, provide additional resources enabling compressed timeline, or accept elevated risk proceeding with compressed timeline and available resources. This creates transparent decision process rather than hidden risk acceptance. Strategic triage requires accepting losses when resource allocation to recovery exceeds value gained. Taros resource commitment consumed 10 regiments needed for Cadian Gate defense, without achieving recovery of minor world possessing minimal strategic value beyond political signaling. Strategic calculus should have accepted Taros' loss temporarily, allocated all available forces to existential threat, then conducted reclamation when strategic situation permitted. This represents hardest strategic decision. Accepting losses, preserving resources for higher priorities. Emotional response to territorial loss and political imperative demonstrating Imperial resolve consistently override rational resource allocation. Yet military strategy requires cold calculation of costs versus benefits, rather than emotional commitment recovering all losses immediately, regardless of strategic impact. Decision framework. When facing operational setback threatening resource commitment, conduct triage assessment, calculate forces required reversing situation, assess opportunity cost of those forces not being available for higher priority operations, evaluate objectives, strategic value, both military and political, and determine net strategic benefit of recovery operation versus accepting loss. Sometimes accepting loss provides better strategic outcome than recovery attempt. Application. Strategic Command maintains priority assessment across all ongoing operations. When operations encounter setbacks requiring increased resource commitment, automated triage review determines if that commitment remains strategically sound given priority hierarchy. This prevents emotional escalation where we've already invested so much. We must see it through logic drives, continued resource waste on operations that should be terminated. Assignment for strategic theory students. Design alternative operational approach for Taros achieving Imperial objectives within resource constraints. Your plan must address 6 requirements. Landing site selection with detailed rationale explaining terrain analysis and logistics factors influencing choice. Force employment prioritization specifying which units execute which missions and sequencing of operations. Logistics security methodology. Describing convoy protection and infrastructure defense measures. Operational timeline with phase transitions showing how campaign develops from initial landing through objective achievement. Decision criteria for each phase advancement determining when conditions permit moving to next phase. And contingency branches for 3 most likely Tau response options, showing planned Imperial reactions. Defend your approach using force ratio analysis accounting for technological factors, terrain appreciation identifying how terrain enables or constrains operations, and logistics mathematics calculating consumption rates and transportation requirements. Submit written analysis examining how your plan addresses specific failures observed in historical Taros operations. Explain which principles your approach applies and how implementation differs from actual campaign. This assignment tests comprehensive operational planning capability requiring synthesis of terrain analysis, force employment theory, logistics calculation, and enemy response anticipation. Most students will discover that designing viable plan within constraints proves extraordinarily difficult, highlighting why Taros operations failed. Constraints of limited forces, compressed timeline, hostile environment, and capable enemy create operational problem with no easy solutions. Recognition of inherent difficulty builds appreciation for operational art complexity. The principle extracted from comprehensive Taros analysis, operational success requires matching strategic approach to environmental reality rather than imposing doctrinal templates regardless of conditions. Imperial forces possessed superior combat power in absolute terms, but applied that power through operational approach unsuited to desert warfare against mobile adversary employing asymmetric strategy. Tau forces, though numerically inferior, employed operational method optimized for defensive operations on favorable terrain, exploiting environmental factors and imperial dependencies. This demonstrates that operational art consists of analyzing specific situation comprehensively and crafting approach suited to actual conditions rather than executing standardized doctrine regardless of environmental reality. Doctrine provides valuable starting framework, but operational environment determines necessary modifications. Commanders who rigidly apply doctrine without adaptation achieve suboptimal outcomes. Commanders who thoughtfully adapt doctrine to circumstances while maintaining sound principles achieve superior results. Taros appears in advanced strategic theory curriculum because it illustrates multiple principle violations occurring simultaneously and compounding effects, creating cascading failure. Single cause failures provide limited instructional value, fix that cause, and problem resolves. Multi-causal failures with interaction effects demonstrate real operational complexity, where multiple factors combine in ways amplifying each failure. Intelligence inadequacy alone might have been overcome through aggressive reconnaissance. Logistics challenges alone might have been managed through methodical approach. Timeline pressure alone might have been resisted through forceful communication with strategic command. Enemy capability alone could have been countered through tactical adaptation. But all factors manifested simultaneously, inadequate intelligence combined with timeline pressure preventing thorough reconnaissance. Logistics challenges combined with enemy interdiction creating crisis. Compressed timeline combined with enemy capability creating unsustainable operational tempo. And doctrinal rigidity combined with environmental reality, creating tactical mismatch. These factors compounded where each amplified others, creating failure cascade. Recognition of compound failure mode enables commanders identifying warning indicators before failure becomes irreversible. Warning indicators of potential Taros-style failure cascade, intelligence picture remains unclear despite extended operations. Logistics consumption exceeds delivery rates, operational tempo degrades without commensurate enemy pressure. Tactical engagements consistently fail achieving intended effects despite competent execution, and casualties mount without corresponding operational gains. When multiple indicators manifest simultaneously, operational pause for reassessment becomes necessary before failure cascade becomes irreversible. For further study, comparative case analysis assignment, examine a Grellan campaign occurring several years post-Taros, where Imperial forces initially achieved operational success before eventual Tau counteroffensive. Identify key differences in operational approach between Taros and a Grellan. Analyze why similar strategic problems produced different operational outcomes at campaign initiation phase. Extract theoretical principles distinguishing campaigns, emphasizing logistics security versus operational tempo. Determine under what conditions each approach proves effective, and when approach selection itself becomes primary determinant of operational outcome. This comparative analysis builds theoretical understanding that operational art requires situational assessment determining appropriate approach rather than universal template application. Sometimes operational tempo creates decisive advantage compelling enemy before they can respond. Sometimes logistics security creates sustainable capability enabling extended operations overwhelming enemy through persistence.
Determining which approach suits specific situation represents core operational art skill, capability developed through comparative case study analysis, examining why similar problems sometimes require opposite solutions. Theory extracted and confirmed. Strategic success requires environmental analysis, enemy capability assessment, resource allocation calculation, timeline determination, and approach selection, synthesizing all factors. No universal formula exists producing optimal approach across diverse scenarios. Instead, operational art requires analytical capability, examining specific situation comprehensively, then crafting approach suited to that situation's unique characteristics. This represents scientific methodology applied to military operations, gather data, analyze conditions, develop hypothesis approach, test through execution. Assess results. Refine understanding. Commanders who master this methodology achieve consistent operational effectiveness across diverse scenarios.